It's the Mario Advance series, though keep in mind there are some things to consider, and remember, there's no accounting for taste. Mario is the quintessential video game franchise, and the original series of 2D Mario games to this day remain as a standard of excellent platforming game design. The games I am referring to, of course, is the Super Mario Bros. Trilogy, Super Mario World, and even Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island. These games are a testament of how fun and timeless games can be as an art form. It's almost indescribable how well these games hold up to this day, and if you haven't given any of these games a try, then I'll say you're greatly missing out. If you do have an interest in playing these games, then luckily they've been readily available on just about every Nintendo system in the past few decades. At this moment, every single one of them is available on Switch, which does require a yearly $20 fee, and even then it's unclear if this is Nintendo's permanent retro solution. I mean, I don't know. I thought Virtual Console was fine, but they killed it. I can't recommend playing these games on Wii or Wii U because they killed it. You can't buy them, they're gone. So if Switch Online doesn't sound appealing to you, let's say I'll turn a blind eye. In all seriousness, the only other thing to think about is what versions of these games are best to play. I have my clear-cut answer, but real quick, let's go over the big three options. First, original release. So the NES versions of the Mario Trilogy, and the SNES versions of Mario World and Yoshi's Island. Second, All-Stars for the Mario Trilogy. Essentially 16-bit versions of the original Mario Bros. Trilogy, with several presentational updates and mild quality of life features like save functionality. This is usually most people's preferred way to play the original Mario Trilogy, because it's comparatively a nicer looking and sounding version of these games when pitched against the NES originals. Besides 16-bit graphics and sound, these versions are almost one-to-one identical to their NES counterparts. If you really want to know what other differences there are, then I'll be as brief as possible with the ones I'm aware of. The default life count is now 5 instead of 3, making each entry more forgiving. Each game has a save feature with multiple save files, which only saves you up to the world you're on, so I don't find it that useful considering you have to replay a whole world if you stop right before the completion of one or run out of continues, with the exception of Lost Levels, which saves on a per level basis, which, let's be honest, is the only way of making that game approachable. Mario 1's physics is slightly altered, mainly in the way you hit blocks, which is less satisfying but otherwise doesn't affect the game except for this part in 4-2, where jumping these Goombas is now needlessly difficult. Otherwise, these games control exactly the same as the NES versions. Mario 1's hit detection is more accurate, which otherwise doesn't affect the game, but does make jumping piranha plants more difficult. There's some added polish in the form of Mario giving a peace symbol, bonus areas having additional graphics and music, Toads having special animations at the end of worlds, a new music track for Bowser fights, audio cues for the maze sections and castle levels, and an added cutscene when you rescue Peach. The slots in Mario 2 are different and more luck-based, where the slots in the original can be easily cheesed to rack up lives. Otherwise, I couldn't really find any other notable changes in this game. In Mario 3, there's an added music cue when collecting a third mismatched card at the end of a level, as well as receiving a letter from Peach at the end of a world. And Bowser's letter at the end has added artwork of him. The kings, instead of being transformed into random creatures, now get turned into Mario 2 enemies, Mario World enemies, Donkey Kong Jr., and Yoshi. After completing a game, you get a quasi-level select, but it's really limited on a per-world basis, so whoopity fucking do. Finally, each game was given additional music at the title, which only enforces how much Nintendo loves the goddamn underwater theme from Mario 1. If there's other small differences that I haven't mentioned, then chances are they're not worth mentioning. Otherwise, despite the things I mentioned, these games are still the exact same experiences as the NES originals. Which isn't to say is bad, as, like I said earlier, these games, even the NES versions, hold up remarkably well. But finally, the third way to play these games, and the versions I'll wholeheartedly recommend, is the Mario Advance series on GBA. I worry most people would only see these as just the All-Stars versions of Mario 2 and 3, and basic SNES ports of Mario World and Yoshi's Island, when in fact there's a plethora of sensible quality of life improvements that makes these games feel a lot more modern, approachable, and overall complete experiences. I may have breezed through the little things All-Stars brought, but I want to give special attention to the additional things the Advance series brought. But before we do that, there's another game that deserves special attention. Yeah, so how about that? They remade Mario 1 on the Game Boy Color. I only bring this up as it acts as sort of a precursor to the Mario Advance series, so I kinda wanted to talk about it real quick. I love the added color and flair given to the title. It's a lot more welcoming than the static silence of the original. Of course, this release is mostly based off the NES version, opposed to All-Stars, but there's quite a bit added here. For the main game, there's now 3 separate save files and an added map, which is pretty cool. The graphics and sound are very similar to the NES version, with added polish like new animations animations for Water/Lava, Toads, and Peach. The save functionality is more modern, with lives now saving up to checkpoints and continues saving up to levels, so you don't have to worry about restarting an entire world should you run out. The physics and handling are a little different, and I can best explain it as Mario's acceleration being a lot quicker. Like, whether you're holding the run button or not, Mario reaches top speed much sooner. Now, of course, for the elephant in the room, the screen crunch. It goes without saying the Game Boy Color doesn't have as much resolution as the NES. Since they wanted to stick to the NES sprite set, the screen real estate has been massively decreased. I will understand if this is a deal breaker for you. Despite how familiar I am with Mario 1, I died a shitload of times on Deluxe because of the screen crunch. You can kinda mitigate it a bit by moving the camera around with the select button, but even then your visibility is greatly reduced. Now, I never got frustrated with dying so many times because of the forgiving save feature and abusing the unlimited 1-up trick, but regardless, if you can't get past the reduced visibility, then that's perfectly understandable. The thing is, and I know it's very weird to say, but after playing through this version recently, I think this version of Mario 1 is the best for newcomers. Let me explain. With Mario's acceleration being increased, it makes the controls more flexible when not holding the run button down, and makes various platforming challenges possible without holding the run button down. I tried it, and playing the game more slowly, only running when I absolutely had to, did decrease the amount of unfair feeling deaths. Because of this, as well as the extremely forgiving save feature, I find Mario Deluxe to be the ideal version to play for either people playing Mario 1 for the first time, or even people playing games for the first time. This game was how I played Mario 1 for the first time, and it's one of the earliest gaming memories I have, and I'd like to think it played a big role in tutorializing me in basic game mechanics like controls and platforming, without having that dated 80s game design of having you retry large chunks of game when you run out of lives and continues. When you complete the game, you get a proper level select, letting you select any level you've already completed. You also have a bonus Collectathon challenge mode where you're tasked with finding red coins and a hidden Yoshi egg throughout all the levels. Not really something I'm into, but can be an awesome time sink for those who get a kick out of this sort of thing. By getting enough points, you also unlock the Luigi icon, which leads to Super Mario Bros. For super players. Basically, it's the first 8 worlds of Mario Lost Levels in this game's engine without any of the graphical updates from Lost Levels. Play it if you want, I'm not. Otherwise, there's some other supplementary crap. Got this mini game where you race Boo in various levels. It's pretty fun, but the screen crunch makes it feel a little unfair at points. To be honest, I only like this mode because of the music. You can look at records. Cool. There's a calendar. Cool. There's this Yoshi thing which gives you a hint to where the Yoshi eggs are. Deadass, the most entertaining thing about this release for me is looking at all the artwork and sprite images you can browse. You can probably get more fun out of this if you have a Game Boy printer, but otherwise, I just like to look at it. Yeah, that's about it. Overall, I'd call this the definite Mario 1 experience because of the better save feature and level select, but that screen crunch, man. I'll say if you can get over that, maybe play the game slower than usual, and are able to accept a couple more deaths, then I say this is the version of Mario 1 to play. With that out of the way, it's time to get to the main event. Okay, first thing. I have no idea why Nintendo decided to release these games out of order on GBA. It starts with Mario 2, then Mario World, then Mario World 2, and finally Mario 3. Not like it really matters all that much, but it does make for a very confusing naming convention. Before we actually talk about these games individually, there are some caveats. As much as I'll say these are the definitive versions of these respective games, I won't hide that these versions also have compromises that may turn off many people. There's a number of things to consider, but for the most part, I think there are 3 aspects of these versions that seem to be problematic for most gamers. At number 3, for the least offensive, is the brightness value. Hey, let me tell you a funny story how Nintendo in 2001 released a cutting-edge handheld gaming device without a fucking light on the screen. Yeah, the original GBA model, or Wide Boy as it's referred to, didn't have a lit screen, just like the old Game Boy models before it. In retrospect, it's astonishing how Nintendo got away with that. Because of that, most early GBA games mostly prioritized brighter, more washed out colors to compensate for the lack of a light on the screen. Conversely, this also means when playing these games on a properly lit screen, Then many GBA games can either appear overly bright, washed out, or both. It's worse for some games than others, and for what it's worth, only the first 3 Mario Advance games really suffer from it, as when Mario Advance 4 came out in 2003, the front-lit GBA SP was released, so games by then could use richer and more vibrant colors. And for Mario Advance 3, it's honestly not that noticeable without a direct comparison. For the first 2 Mario Advance games, they are noticeably less vibrant on GBA compared to their SNES versions. This will bother some gamers more than others, and for those who do find it distracting, I offer 3 possible solutions that may fix this problem for you. If you play on emulators or on flash carts, then you can simply apply a patch for the ROMs that essentially restore the same color palettes as on Super Nintendo. It does make a difference after the patch, so if the previous brightness values bothered you too much, then this could be the fix for you. For the second fix, play on Switch. See, when Nintendo released GBA games on Wii U, their solution for the brightness issue was just darkening the entire image. Needless to say, it doesn't look very good, and this was a problem for various Virtual Console releases. But for Nintendo Switch, they've applied a more modern solution. Lately, over the past few years, there have been efforts in the GBA emulation community to provide a gamma correction filter to make games appear more accurate to the original LCD screen they were designed for. Now, I'll admit I don't quite understand this that well, so please don't take what I say too seriously. And for anyone more familiar about this, then feel free to elaborate in the comments. But how I understand it is that these gamma corrections aim to make the colors appear how they did on the original unlit GBA screen, and not an actual backlit screen, like how your eyes would perceive the image on the unlit screen. At first I was a little skeptical of this concept, but it seems Nintendo has applied their own gamma corrections to GBA games on the Switch Online service, and it really does make a remarkable difference. The colors may still not appear as rich on Super Nintendo, but this is far more palatable compared to how they looked before. Finally, the solution that's been most effective for me, and one I would propose more people to try, is to not give a shit. Look, hear me out. When actually playing these games on a Game Boy player, something kind of magical happened to me. After a few minutes of playing, I stopped noticing the brightness difference. I stopped caring, and I was just playing the game and having fun with it. And small graphical differences didn't matter anymore. This is not a cop-out answer. I would legitimately implore more people to not let details like these bother them, as ultimately they don't matter too much, at least to me. Of course, I won't try to convince people otherwise, and if the brightness is that much of an issue for you, then maybe the gamma corrections or ROM patches will do the trick for you. For the second issue with the Mario Advance games, and one that's debatably more distracting, is the audio and music. Hey, let me tell you a funny story how Nintendo in 2001 released a cutting-edge handheld gaming device without dedicated fucking sound hardware. So all of the audio is backed off the CPU, and the results are an acquired taste. For what it's worth, I think most of the GBA's library has fantastic music that doesn't sound compromised by the lack of a dedicated sound chip. The only reason the Mario Advance series sounds way inferior is because we have the SNES versions to directly compare. To be completely fair though, I think only Mario Advance 2 Super Mario World really suffers from this. Mario Advance 1, I genuinely prefer the instrumentation of the GBA version opposed to All-Stars. Mario Advance 3 hardly sounds much different at all, just a little more compressed. Advance 4, I really like the instrumentation, like the heavier slap bass for the underground theme. And replacing the horns from Super Nintendo with a more menacing drone. Mario Advance 2, however, yeah, it's quite unflattering to be fair. Now, if it's too bothersome, then there are 2 solutions I'd recommend. The first is for Mario Advance 2, where there's an instrument restoration patch that makes the music sound a little more like on SNES. It's a small change, but does make the music sound a lot more pleasant, especially if you enjoy the original music so much. The second, and this applies to all Mario Advance games, is to not give a shit. Listen, I played through the Mario Advance games right after the SNES versions, and to be honest, the audio differences really didn't bother me that much, if at all. Of course, Mario Advance 2 is the most egregious example, but even then, I stopped thinking, oh, it's so much worse, to, oh, it's just different. And for the other games, it's either they sound the same except a little more compressed, or I genuinely think the instrumentation is improved. So if you really hate how the Mario Advance series sounds, then that's understandable and fair, as the GBA itself is compromised in terms of audio capabilities. But I'd still implore to keep an open mind, as I find objective upgrades here. For instance, Mario 3 suffered from pretty noticeable audio distortion and cuts whenever other sound effects would play. This was a common issue on NES, and I find it quite charming actually, but even on All-Stars, the second melody of the athletic theme still gets drowned out by the other sound effects. On GBA, this is no longer a problem. And if you're thinking, wow, who fucking cares? I say, exactly. Mario Advance, audio-wise, is inferior to the Super Nintendo in many ways, but even then, I don't think it's as bad as most would make it out to be, and honestly, I wouldn't even call it bad. It's just different. So I say, keep an open mind. Finally, at the third issue of the Mario Advance series, and most apparent, is the screen crunch. Hey, let me tell you a funny story how Nintendo in 2001 released a cutting-edge handheld gaming device that couldn't even be in fucking 240p. Now, okay, perhaps at the time it would have been far more costly than I'd expect, and to be fair, it's not like it actually affects GBA games since they can simply be designed to accommodate the low resolution. But for adapting the sprite set of a system that's 240p, then screen crunch is inevitable. For what it's worth, it's not nearly as bad as Mario Deluxe. You can even see the devs being cheeky about it in the Mario Advance intro showing how much extra screen space the GBA has compared to older Game Boys. So, in practice, the screen crunch really isn't that bad. Mario Advance and Advance 2 let you shift the camera around if you need to, and Advance 3 and 4 have a more dynamic camera that tracks where you're going, so you should hardly be blindsided by obstacles. It's actually kind of surprising how little the screen crunch affects each game. Makes me wonder if Mario Deluxe would have been as bad if it had that extra real estate. I understand it may look a bit intimidating, not being able to see as much as the original games, but trust me, it hardly affects the gameplay. After all, these games don't usually require the player to engage with obstacles unless they're already pretty close, so the advanced versions remain completely playable even with a smaller screen space. Truthfully, I completely forgot about it after playing, so I wouldn't let the screen crunch be a turnoff. But if it does for you, then unfortunately there's not really a solution opposed to just playing the Super Nintendo versions. Though I feel the Mario Advance series offers a lot more to make up for what shortcomings they have. So let's talk about it and go over each game in this series to see what's new and improved. Super Mario Advance, which is another version of Super Mario Bros. 2. This version is mostly based off the All-Stars version, but there is loads of updates akin to Mario Deluxe. For starters, we have this nifty opening intro and added title screen. It's actually kind of weird, as this version removes the intro cutscene that explains the basic story for this game. So unless you have the manual or read up about it, you're not gonna know what the basic story is. It's whatever, who cares? There is a multiplayer component with the Mario Advance series, but I can't really talk about it as I don't have any friends. For some reason, a souped up version of the original Mario Bros. Arcade game is also included in every Mario Advance game. Real quick, it's a modernized version of Mario Bros. With far better controls. To tell you the truth, this is really the only version of Mario Bros. I'll touch. I gave it a good 10 minutes and it's pretty good fun all considering. Definitely something you can sink hours into if you like this kind of gameplay. For the main game, it's Mario Bros. 2, but with a plethora of updates. In fact, this might be the most changed game in the whole Advance series, or at least the changes are most noticeable. You have 3 save files now, and where All-Stars only saves up to the world, here it saves up to the level, and lives only save up to whatever screen you're on. So overall, it's a much more forgiving system that doesn't necessarily make the game easier, just more approachable. So new players won't have to play huge chunks of the game just because they ran out of lives. Which works here since the levels in Mario 2 are pretty fucking long as it is. The character selection screen has gotten a spiffy makeover. They even show all the stats of each character in case you weren't aware. There's a new screen showing all the levels. Doesn't add much, but it's a cool way to track how far you are in the game. Right at the start of the first level, there's already some updates. The difficulty balancing is updated beyond the live system. Before, you needed to defeat 8 enemies just to get a heart to appear. Now, you only need to combo 2 enemies to get a heart. The hearts themselves are much larger and easier to snag, and to top it off, there's more hearts spruced all over the place. There's even these large shy guys that fart out a heart just from you throwing them. Considering how challenging it is to get hearts in the original, then this is a sensible update in my opinion. 1-ups also seem to be more common throughout the levels, offering more opportunities to get them outside of the slots. The slots are pretty much the same as All-Stars, but this time around you can bet more coins to increase your chances at a larger life gain. There's some added graphical polish, like the additional score numbers that appear when tossing enemies. Doing the super jump now gives the characters a cool new animation. The inside of pipes have gotten a much needed makeover, complete with new, more appropriate music. These sub-areas feel a lot more lively, where they felt more drab and stark in the original and All-Stars. When collecting enough cherries, there's an added jingle for when the star appears. Not a big change, but it's an appreciated audio cue. There's a cool new music track right before boss encounters, which is a nice detail. And when clearing a course, there's a new music chime, which I've always enjoyed. The bosses themselves have had some order rearrangement, and they have new voices provided by Charles Martinet and Jen Taylor.
This is as far as you go. Here, have some fun. I'm gonna finish you off.
Step right up. Get you ready to get toasted.
I'm too hot to touch.
You'll make a tasty treat.
I am the Great Wart. Ha ha ha!
There's even a new boss with Roberto, who's actually quite challenging. The voices themselves have also been a contentious part of the Mario Advance series. For die-hard fans of the OG versions and All-Stars, it may seem a little jarring to have the characters all of a sudden shout lines as you play. For what it's worth, I feel it's only egregious with this first Advance game. Since it's Mario 2, the characters are picking up things all the time, which is now accompanied by these new voices. So I can understand if it gets annoying, though it's never bothered me. I actually think it's kind of cool that these classic Mario games are now supported by Charles Martinet's voice. And with Charles stepping down as Mario now, it only makes me appreciate these voices more. I mean, he's gone now. Charles is gone. We're not going to hear his voice anymore. He's done. So I'm going to satiate as much of Charles's performances as I can, god damn it. For the controls, I did notice it feels a little different compared to the NES and All-Stars versions, mainly how throwing items work. Like, I feel the arc is steeper, which can make it harder to hit things, mainly during bosses. When you complete the game, you're given a proper level select allowing you to play any level you want. Similar to Mario Deluxe, you're provided an optional challenge of finding hidden Yoshi eggs throughout all the levels. Couldn't tell you what the reward is after doing it, as I've never had much interest in this sort of thing, but I still find it a decent way to squeeze more playtime out of this game. Another new challenge you can shoot for is collecting all of the ace coins they've added throughout all the levels. They're similar to the Yoshi coins of Mario World. Collect all 5 in a level and you're given an extra life. Again, I don't have much personal incentive to do it, but if you're a completionist, then this could be a fun challenge. Overall, it's the same Mario 2 experience. Some could argue that it's way too easy now with all the extra lives and hearts. Maybe so. I could see it as a way to help accommodate the screen crunch since you're likely to take a few more hits. Even still, playing this nearly right after playing through All-Stars, which was nearly right after the original, I can say that this is still the same fun Mario 2 experience, with modern updates that feel appropriate and overall better to replay thanks in part to the collectible challenge and simply being able to replay any level you want. If you still prefer the OG or All-Stars, then that's just fine. Mario 2 is a good game. Doesn't really matter what version you play. But I'd recommend Mario Advance as this feels like the most complete version of Mario 2. And in a fun, abstract way, this is a full-blown remake of Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic. And I think that's pretty cool, man. So next is Mario World. Yeah, I don't know what Nintendo was thinking with this release order. Right out of the gate, there's a new intro cutscene to provide the basic premise of the game without a manual, which is pretty cool. I guess Nintendo realized that not many people actually look through the manual, so having a new cinematic is a nice touch. The way these new intros transition to the new title screens was always so cool to me, though Nintendo's infatuation with the Mario 1 underwater theme is starting to get egregious. You got the multiplayer, which I can't comment on, and you got Mario Bros again, so cool. Once you're in the Mario World title screen proper, right out of the way I noticed they got rid of that useless stray pixel from before. You know, the one that you've never noticed until someone points it out and now you can't unsee it? Well, it's gone now. They've killed it. Can't hurt you anymore. Thank fucking God. Can't really compliment the save files as it was always a part of Mario World. Luigi accompanies Mario in the intro now to reinforce his added presence. You can switch to Luigi at any time on the world map and he's quite different here compared to before. Before he was just a palette swap of Mario, then in the version of Mario World on the All-Stars re-release, Luigi got updated sprites, which was pretty cool, but to be honest, I never liked these sprites. In Mario Advance 2, Luigi got new, better looking sprites in my opinion, but they've also carried over his now trademark higher jump and slippery traction. The game itself is closer to its original version than Mario Advance 1, but there's still some notable updates. There aren't as many graphical flourishes as Advance 1, with the new 1-up graphic and the top secret area getting a smiley face being the only ones that come to mind. They've added lines to the Mitch-Match minigame to better convey how many lives you win in them. The save system is far better in my opinion than to how it was in the original. In the original, you had to complete a fortress, ghost house, or switch palace to save the game proper. Then if you run out of lives, you're booted to the last one you finished. I know it's easy to not care in today's age of save states and rewind features, but as someone who avoids using those, then this kind of thing does matter to me. Especially how in the Super Nintendo versions of all these games, your life count gets reset once you shut the game off or go back to the title screen. These games will partially save your progress, but not the amount of lives you've accumulated. Again, easy to not care with save states, but come on man, it's hard to feel accomplished for racking up the lives when you know it'll all be gone once you choose to call it a day. So the fact that your life count gets saved properly is a definite improvement in my honest opinion. The save system itself is more modern, now letting you save whenever, so lives really only save checkpoints. Which, saying out loud, kinda negates the need for large live counts, but fuck you, I like my large live counts. That's skill, only skilled people have large live counts. The biggest difficulty change in this version is proper power-up progression. What I mean is how, oddly in the original Mario World, Mario would go back to small Mario after getting hit, even if he was powered up with a fire flower or cape feather, just like the original Super Mario Bros. I say oddly because Mario 3 would have it where if you had a power-up beyond Super Mario, then you would just go back to Super Mario and not small Mario. I understand this was a regional change, but come on, it made sense. It made the difficulty balancing feel a lot more fair. Going back to the Mario Bros. 1 rules always came off as strange to me. You could argue that's what Yoshi is for, since Yoshi sorta acts as an additional hit point, and one that could be abused if you manage to get back on Yoshi before the invincibility frames run out, but you're not going to have Yoshi most of the time, so this design element still sticks out to me. In Advance 2, it's updated. Now if you're Fire Mario or Cape Mario and get hit, you'll only go back to Super Mario and not Small Mario. You could argue that makes the game too easy, but to me, it's not about what feels easier, it's about what feels legit. And OG Mario World did not feel legit. I still say it's an appropriate update and falls closer in line to Mario 3 and how future 2D Mario games would handle the power-up progression system. The main adventure itself is pretty much identical to how it was on Super Nintendo. Other extremely small changes would be being able to climb faster when holding the run button, and the Koopalings now having added dinosaur sounds when they fall into lava. I guess it would be worth noting that this version runs better. It's almost imperceptible, but while playing, I noticed the loading into new areas is faster, there's not as much slowdown, and the zoom out at the end of levels doesn't lag like in the original. I guess it makes sense. The GBA is a 32-bit system compared to the 16 bits on Super Nintendo. Portable or otherwise, it's still a 10-year hardware difference. The controls here feel identical to the original, which really shouldn't be worth mentioning, but just in case it was ever a concern. Actually, if there's one thing about how this game controls that I like more is having the spin jump on the right shoulder button now, instead of another face button. In 2D platformers, especially Mario games, keeping your thumb on the run and jump buttons at all times should be prioritized, but having to take your thumb off in the original to spin jump was always awkward to me. In today's age of emulator button remapping, you can say it's a non-issue, but fuck you, I don't want to do that. It just feels more comfortable in Advance 2 since I can use my index to spin jump and keep my thumbs on the run and jump buttons where they belong. You still have the original completion incentives of completing the special world and locating all the secret exits. It's more convenient here since there's a new level tracker that tracks all the levels you've completed as Mario and Luigi, the exits of each level, and if you collected all the Yoshi coins in each level. So there's another purpose for those beyond extra lives. Once you beat the game, this also turns into a level select and warp system, letting you spawn wherever on the map. so that's useful. Once you complete the special world, there's an added cutscene of Luigi dropping those weird fucking Mario heads, along with a new congratulations screen, making the completion of the special world feel a little more rewarding. All in all, I'd say this is the better version of Mario World to play should anyone be interested or otherwise curious. Sure, you have the caveats of the screen crunch, which doesn't affect the game as much as you think, the lower quality sound, which after a while doesn't even sound bad, just different. Hell, I'd say I prefer the extra crunch from the explosion sound effect in the advanced version. There's also the washed out colors, but I got used to them after minutes of playing and it's not even an issue for me anymore. Regardless, I feel all the little quality of life updates far outweigh all of its shortcomings, so pitting the two together, I feel Mario Advance 2 is the better experience. In a weird display of continuity on Nintendo's part, the next advanced title is Super Mario World 2, now being fully rebranded as just Yoshi's Island. This game already had an expository intro cutscene, so there was no need for them to make a new one for Advance 3. Multiplayer? Check. Mario Bros? Check. One pretty big addition is the inclusion of a sleep mode. This kind of game feature wasn't standardized in handhelds until the DS, however several later GBA games had a sleep mode function included. Sleep mode has become one of my favorite system features in recent times. Especially if you have a busy schedule, being able to effectively turn the console off, yet also being able to jump right where you left off without waiting for boot up is really nice. You can only use this feature when playing on an actual GBA, but it's still a very appreciated inclusion, especially if you play on OG hardware. In fact, now I'm wondering if the extremely forgiving save feature of the previous games was to help accommodate the portable nature of these versions without a sleep function. Right away at the title, I gotta admit, it looks much smoother now. Maybe all those fancy Super FX graphics in the original were out of this world and they still look really cool, but the GBA version looks better in my opinion. Could also be the 32 bits outshining the 16 bits again, but I feel all the special graphical effects like sprite rotation looks a hair nicer on GBA. There's a new part of the map that shows all the worlds up to Bowser's Castle, which is a nice detail. The level select itself seems to have been simplified, but otherwise maintains the same basic aesthetic. Once you're in the main game, there's even fewer differences compared to Mario World, probably because Yoshi's Island at this point was already pretty modern with its game design, so there's really not that much to mention outside of a few very minor differences. I guess the first that you'll notice is Yoshi now having his voice from Yoshi's story, which would then become the standard voice for Yoshi. It's understandable if you find this annoying, but I've gotten so used to Yoshi's modern voice from newer games, Smash Bros, Mario Kart, and Mario Party, so I have no issue with it. I just see it as a new take on this game, one that I feel provides more vocal variety compared to Yoshi's old record scratch sound. Another issue some may have is how they've removed the extremely subtle red tint that was on red coins in the original. Gonna be honest, I could never see it. I feel red coins were already pretty easy to make out just from their placement in the levels. And also that's what the magnifying glass item is for if you really wanted to seek them out. There's a new point tally at the end of levels that adds all the points you've earned throughout all the levels total. After getting enough, you're rewarded with extra lives, which isn't much, but it's great to have a new incentive for getting high scores outside of full completion, especially if you're like me and don't give a shit about full completion. Lives are retroactively more rewarding here since Mario Advance 3 saves your life count after shutting the game off, unlike the original. You could argue it's not that useful since Yoshi's Island already saves on a per level basis, but Yoshi's Island's levels are long as shit, so being able to retry at checkpoints really does make lives matter here. The screen crunch was hardly noticeable while playing since Yoshi's Island's camera is a lot more dynamic that tracks where you're going, so I never found getting blindsided to ever be a problem. I guess I could mention a few other pointless differences, like how Baby Mario's nose is more plumping around when looking up, or how Kamek's magic is missing that extra graphic, which is probably the biggest downgrade for me, as inconsequential as it is. The controls are once again identical, except for the egg toss now being on the right shoulder button. With this small button placement tweak, I say it makes the advanced version control way better. I know Yoshi's Island doesn't have a run button, but you still use the button for Yoshi's tongue, an action you'll be doing a lot, so having to take the thumb off in the original to throw eggs was always uncomfortable for me. Because of this, I use the patience scheme in the original, which works fine. However, thanks to the egg toss being on the shoulder button now, I can use the hasty scheme, which otherwise is my preferred control option. I find it a lot more responsive, and timing egg throws feels much easier and satisfying. To give you an idea, I got my ass handed to me by the final boss in the original because I just could not get the timing down. But on GBA with the hasty scheme using the shoulder button, I could time egg throws much more competently. And for those of you saying I could just remap the buttons on an emulator, I say fuck you, I don't want to do that. Plus, I've been playing these games via the original releases on NES, SNES, and a Game Boy player on GameCube, because I want to judge them based on their original release, and not let any emulator features save them from criticism. I don't really have much more to say about this version. Overall, because this version is so much closer to its original compared to the other advanced games, then it's one I won't wholeheartedly recommend over the original. They're pretty neck and neck, but if I had to pick one, I'd still go Advance. It feels more satisfying and fun to play with having the shoulder button handle egg tossing. As small of a change as it is, it makes all the difference for me. I can't help but have this theory that the reason the Advance series release order is so strange is because they deliberately wanted Mario 3 to be the last one. Mario 3 can be seen as the most quintessential Mario game. So many conventions, imagery, and gameplay elements that would be used in future Mario games all came from Mario 3. So in a strange way, this seemed like an appropriate finale to the Mario Advance series. An intro cutscene was added to provide the basic premise of the story, which is appreciated. Kind of a small thing, but I want to mention it, but I find the logo more pleasing to the eyes. I don't know, the original is kind of an eyesore for me with the blue juxtaposed to the yellow background. The added white outline and repositioning of Bros makes this a far more attractive logo to me. Multiplayer, Mario Bros, Sleep Mode. Okay, this is fucking weird. They added rumble functionality for GameCube controllers as the Game Boy player was released by then. Now, I would not recommend playing these games with a GameCube controller, but the kicker is that Nintendo implemented this rumble functionality into the Switch Online version. It's nothing much. The controller will now rumble whenever you take a hit or die. I think I prefer it off, to be honest. The HUD has been simplified, which is nice since it was always kind of weird how much space it took up in the original. Mario's hands are now white to imply gloves, where he looks barehanded in All-Stars. The game mostly uses the sprite assets from All-Stars, but for some reason they got rid of the custom images for minigames. Not really sure why. The item screen now shows all the space you have at once, which I prefer. Toad Houses now let you skip the dialogue and grab an item instantly, and dead fucking serious, this alone makes this the best version. Bonus areas now have a new music track that sounds distinctly Mario 3. Because of Sleep Mode, the save system is more modern Mario, where if you need to shut the game off, you can save and quit to the title screen and resume where you left off from before. However, in order to properly save your progress, you need to either beat a fortress or airship stage. Losing all your lives boots you to the last one you've completed. So not as forgiving as the previous Advance games, but not as brutal as All-Stars, which only saves per world. This is a nice balance that I think most people would be fine with. Completing a world is now given a new fanfare screen, which is cool. The adventure is still the same as ever, so there's not really much else to mention as far as differences or updates go. One cool thing is this added moment in World 8. Kinda random, but neat. I noticed Peach's sprite was updated and the callback to Super Mario Bros. 1 was removed. Once you beat the game, there's a new world map with a deep cut music track that tributes the old versus Super Mario Bros. Arcade game. You're able to revisit all previous worlds. You can even visit rescued castles, which is a neat touch. At this point, you're free to replay any levels you've completed or finish the levels you didn't. Also, please tell me I'm not the only one, but has anyone ever gotten trapped in this loop with the card match minigame? What's up with that? That's kind of annoying. Upon completing every level in the game, you're treated to a special credits scene. Afterwards, the game goes into a full completion state where every level, fortress, castle, and even Toad Houses are now free to be replayed. I find this much better than the game just giving you a bunch of P-Wings in the original or the World Select in All-Stars. This would have been the end of it, and already I would be promoting Advance 4 as the best version of Mario 3 for all the quality of life updates and improved presentation. However, there's a bonus world accessible from the title screen, World E. As a kid, this world always perplexed me. I had no idea what an e-reader was. I kept trying in vain to figure out what I was supposed to do, but to no avail. I did learn many years later what the e-reader was and how you were supposed to scan cards cards to unlock more levels in World E. Unfortunately, by that point, the e-reader and its cards were getting very expensive and I never pursued it. Luckily, in a rare display of Nintendo being awesome, they used a custom ROM for Advance 4 for their Virtual Console release on Wii U and Switch Online that had all the e-reader levels unlocked from the get-go. And holy shit, there's a lot of levels. Let me tell you, being able to play these levels for the first time after a decade of playing this game was very surreal. After all, most of my life, I didn't even know these levels existed. It starts with the first world from the original Super Mario Bros., now with the mechanics of Mario 3. I guess it was also an excuse for Nintendo to reuse the music from Mario 1 All-Stars. These e-reader levels sport new assets and mechanics, usually ripped from previous Mario games. It's so weird because at one point you can pluck veggies like Mario 2, then have a charging chuck from Mario World come out of nowhere. Speaking of which, you have the cape feather, which is always fun to use. The ace coins from Advance 1 are included for further completion incentive, but I just like playing the levels as is. One aspect about these levels that you might want to be aware of is that they're pretty fucking hard. Not in a way that feels cheap like some other games, but challenges and obstacles that are legitimately difficult. You could almost see this as a completely new game, just without a story. It's the perfect way to cap off the Mario Advance series by bringing together previous mechanics from other games, adding in whole new mechanics with some brutal level design, while using Mario 3 to bind it all together. It's the best way to cap off a 2D Mario marathon, and if you haven't played these levels yet, then you should really give them a try. But holy shit, am I sick of playing Mario. You have to understand, I played through the entirety of all these games multiple times from beginning to end. Mario 1 3 times, Mario 2 3 times, Mario 3 3 times, Mario World twice, and Yoshi's Island twice. It probably wasn't necessary, but I wanted to make sure I covered as much of these games as possible to examine if the Advance series had much to offer. Within reason, because remember, I'm not a completionist. I also deliberately played the Advance series last because I wanted to experiment if they had enough to offer to justify an already fatigued Mario marathon. And I think my point still stands as the Advance series being the best and overall most polished way to experience the classic 2D Mario games. Mario Deluxe gets an honorable mention, but in that case I would concede that the screen crunch there is too much to make it the end-all be-all definitive Mario 1 experience. It's really quite remarkable how little the screen crunch actually affects the gameplay within the Advance games. Whether it's because the games are much better designed or that extra little bit of real estate making all the difference. There's also the debatably inferior music and sound, as well as brighter colors, which, if I'm going to be honest, I think I've grown to prefer, and now looking at the original darker colors, that has sort of become the eyesore for me. Regardless, all the modern touch-ups like added cinematics, tweaked control schemes, modernized save systems, and in Advance 4's case, a crap load of additional content has made the Mario Advance games the incontrovertible superior way to play these classic Mario games for me. Ultimately, I'm not going to say you shouldn't play the other versions. No matter how, these games remain timeless masterpieces that stand strong even today. But if you were to play them for the first time or revisit them, I'd implore you to check the Advance versions. I feel the Switch is probably the best way to go about it. I mean, I was able to capture off a real Game Boy player and real cartridges, but admittedly it's not the most convenient setup. Game Boy Advance games look really nice on Switch since the emulation is top notch. The adjusted gamma values really do make the games more eye-pleasing, and you get all the locked content in Advance 4, and that alone would probably justify the $50 yearly cost for the expansion pass just to play it. Sure, you have the new Super Mario Bros. Games, but coming from recently playing through all of them earlier this year, it's a very homogenized experience with each entry having the same basic art style, exact same controls, pretty much the same fucking soundtrack, which is my biggest issue, and overall not really doing anything that distinct or unique with each game. The Mario Advance series in that regard provides all the variety of Mario's original 2D run, all in one tightly designed series of games. But I gotta tell you, I'm pretty fucking burnt from playing Mario games, and I reckon I won't pick up a Mario game for a while. Oh my god, this game looks so good. Oh, I can't wait to play it. I can't wait to play it. It probably goes without saying that my next video will take a while. There's so many new and awesome games that I want to play that I won't have time to accolade for my next video. I will say my next video shouldn't be that long, so I'll try my best to have it out as soon as I can. I want to thank those who stuck with it this long on another lame-ass Mario video. I really just wanted to cover the Advance games since they hold a lot of nostalgic value for me as not only being a gateway into Mario's formidable history, but a gateway into video games period, so I'll always appreciate them for that. I reckon that will be all for me today, so the only thing I have left to say is thank you for watching.